The second part of today's lesson is regarding equilateral triangles. Equilateral triangles are triangles where all three sides are congruent. Our equilateral triangle theorem states if the triangle is equilateral, then it must also be equal angular. So if we know that all three sides are congruent on a triangle, then we know that all three angles also have to be congruent. Get those lines a little straighter here. So we know that angle A has to be congruent to angle B, and that angle B has to be congruent to angle C. The converse is also true. If we know that all the angles are equal, then we know that it is an equilateral triangle. So if we are told that all three angles on this triangle are congruent, then we also know that all three sides also must be congruent. We also know that because all the angles of a triangle add up to 180, then every angle in an equilateral triangle has to be equal to 60 degrees. So if we're trying to find the measurements of x, in this first example we're told that all three angles are congruent. Therefore we know that all three sides would also be congruent. So to find x, we can set 6x equal to 24. Divide both sides by 6, so x is 4. In the second example, again we're told that all three angles are congruent. Therefore we know all three sides are congruent. So I can set the sides equal to each other and solve for x. So add 1 to both sides, so 20 equals 2x. Divide by 2, so x is 10. In the last example, we're told that all three sides are congruent. So if we know that all three sides are congruent, that means that all three angles would also be congruent. We also know that all three angles would be equal to 60 degrees since it is an equilateral triangle and an equal angular triangle. So I can set 5x equal to 60. Divide both sides by 5, so x is 12. In the next example, we're trying to find the value of x and y. Since we know that this triangle has two congruent sides, we know that by the isosceles triangle theorem that the angles opposite those sides would also be congruent. So therefore this side here would also be equal to y. In the same token, in the second triangle, our orange triangle here, we know that these two sides are congruent, so the angles opposite their sides would also be congruent. So we can therefore call this x as well. In our first yellow triangle then, we'll go back to our orange triangle. So since we know the measurements of all three of our angles in our orange triangle, x plus 44, and we know those must equal 180, combine like terms, 2x plus 44 equals 180. Subtract 44 from both sides. So 2x equals 136. Divide by 2, and x equals 68. So now that we know that this value of this angle is 68, we know that this line here that I'm highlighting here, this is a straight angle. Therefore, that must add up to 180 degrees. So the measurement of this angle over here must be 112. Now we can solve for our missing value of y in our yellow triangle. Y plus 112 equals 180. Subtract 112 from both sides. So I have 2y equals 68. Divide by 2, and y equals 34. Okay, in our next example, we'll look at our blue triangle first. We know that that is an equilateral triangle because all sides have been marked congruent. Therefore, we know that all angles are also congruent and have to be 60 degrees. So x is 60. Then we take a look at our green triangle to find y. We notice that this is an isosceles triangle where this side is congruent to this side. Therefore, the angles opposite those sides would also be congruent. So since this is y, this would also need to be y. We also notice that we have a straight angle right here on this side. So since one part of the angle is 60, that means the other part would be equal to 120. So we now have our angle measurements. Y plus 120 equals 180. 2y plus 120 equals 180. Subtract 120 from both sides. 2y equals 60. Divide by 2. Y equals 30. In our last example, we are given that this angle here is 150. Since we know that's a linear pair, we know that this is supplementary. So this angle would have to be 30. We are given our congruent markings, which means the angles opposite those sides are congruent. So this angle over here would also have to be 30. Now we can write a statement, x plus 30 equals 180. Combine like terms, x plus 60 equals 180. Subtract 60 from both sides, x equals 120.